Hi. So in my section called Imagination, I want to give you this true story called The Hitchhiker. So here we go. So many years ago, my husband and I were driving on some pretty long trip, and we picked up this man who was hitchhiking, and he was, I don't know, maybe late 50s, early 60s, and he had the sweetest smile. He was kind, and he seemed to genuinely want to know about our lives and why we would pick him up and all that good stuff. So we went through, I would think, a couple of hours of talking about different times in our lives, and he was such a good listener. And finally I looked at him and I said, "Can you tell me what was going on in your life when you were 21 or so?" And he just let out this laugh of delight, and he said, "Oh, I would love to, but first I want to start with maybe 18 or so, when I had just graduated from high school." I said, "Great." So I was excited. I thought, oh, I'm going to hear this wonderful story. And I was. So when he was 18, he graduated, and his friends were going off to school, and they were getting married, and they were moving to other parts of the country, and he had no sense of who he was or what he wanted to do. And he felt like he was going to disappoint his family and just never become somebody, as he called it. And so then he let out this deep, deep sigh of delight. And he said, "So let me tell you about the blessing." And when he was 21, the Great Depression, as he called it, happened. And he said that all of a sudden, with the Great Depression, he didn't have to prove anything. He didn't have to figure out who he was. He didn't have to compete. All he needed to do was get up in the morning, help his family run the farm. He lived in a community with several farms that he said were maybe 1.5 miles to 3 miles apart. And he said he knew that his only job was to take care of his parents because they were older and couldn't do the farm by themselves anymore. And so his job was to take care of the animals, take care of his parents, and to grow fruits and vegetables, and to do a whole lot of storing of food, like canning and drying and that kind of thing. And it was so easy for him because it's what he'd done his entire life. So he said that the members of the community, the other farmers in the community, got together when they realized that the so-called Great Depression was real and that it was going to last a while. And so they got together and they each took on a specialty. Every single person grew fruits and vegetables, and they always grew extra because there were some people who weren't healthy or didn't have a mate or were sick or whatever, and so they would always grow extra fruit and vegetables for their neighbors, no matter how long this was going to go on. And then they would take on their specialty, and like, for example, one person took on having bees so that they could have honey, and another person took on growing certain herbs for medicine, and people had chickens for eggs and meat, and people had livestock. And one woman didn't grow anything except babies because she was a midwife, and they still fed her all the time. So what would happen is that maybe once a week, he thought he remembered that it was Thursday, his family, their specialty was to grow pigs. And so he would take pork. Sometimes he'd take baby pigs. But overall, he took pork to each neighbor. And he went through how delicious the bacon was and the sausage was and the pork roast. And he loved going to other people's farms because they would be so proud showing him what they had gotten done and how their specialty was going. And because he was young and healthy, they often would have him take their specialty also to the next farm. So he loved this time when he got to see the vulnerability of people trying to be a gift to one another. And he felt like it was just the most natural thing in the world to be that kind, to be that helpful. So then he talked about his favorite time of the day, and that was nighttime. And at night, after dinner, the whole family would get together, and sometimes it would be other people who were lonely or didn't have somebody to be with. And so they would come and be family for the evening. And at that point, somebody would be chosen to read to them. Could be fiction, could be anything, but one person was the reader, and the mom always was darning and repairing clothes, and he says he can still hear the sound of his father sharpening his tools. And so they did that until the story that was being read was finished. And they had to get up early, because they were running a farm and there was a lot to take care of. But before they went to bed, they all gathered around the kitchen table and they drank either hot tea or steamed milk. And they discussed what they had learned from the reading. And he said he was just blown away that people could hear the same story and get a totally different meaning out of it. So then they would go to bed, and then they would get up very early, and it would just all start again, and he didn't have to think about what he was going to do that day. He was just there to love through doing his work. And so then he talked about, I think it was Saturday nights. On Saturday night, the whole community would choose a different barn each week, and they would come together in the barn, and they would have a dance, or they would tell stories, and they got really good at storytelling, or they would have a talent show. But he said his favorite was the dances. And he said that he loved watching, as he called them, the pretty things. Back in a sexist time, he loved watching the teenage girls. And part of what he really liked was that the girls would gather before the dance and they would all trade clothes so that they could feel beautiful, feel like they were wearing something new and gorgeous. So he liked dancing with the girls, although he said he was a little shy. But then he said that his very favorite person to dance with was his grandmother, because she couldn't walk much anymore, but she had loved to dance. And so he would lift her up and stand her down on his feet. And as he moved, her feet would move, and they would dance together. And he said that she would just laugh until she cried. And when he was telling me that story, he started to cry, just from the sweetness of that memory. And then on Sunday morning, they'd all go to church. And he made sure to tell me that it wasn't a religious occasion, because there was only one church in the community, and they all believed the same thing, although he said that later he found out they didn't, but they pretended to. And it was more a social event, just to be together. And on Sunday afternoon, they would figure out who of the various farmers needed help, and they would go and bring in a crop or rebuild a barn or whatever they needed to do for each other. And he felt like he belonged. He felt like there was no thing that he could do wrong that would stop people from loving him. And then his voice got very serious, and he started talking about when the Great Depression was over. And all of a sudden, he had to define himself. He had to figure out who he was supposed to be in the world to make his family proud. And he couldn't get any sense of instructions about that. And he said that he went into deep depression after the Depression was over. Whereas during the Depression, it had been the happiest time of his life. And he said that as he looks back, he even thinks that maybe he was mentally ill for a while. And then there was that sigh again, and the smile came back, and he said, "So you know what I did?" I went back and I took over my parents' farm, and I've been farming ever since. And now I'm happy again. But he said, "I'm still learning, and I want you to know that I'm still learning now." I think he said something like 62 or something. And he said, "It is such a blessing that you picked me up to hitchhike, because you reminded me of the kindness and the connection and what community could be like, but it's not anymore. But you are, and that gives me great hope."